Even men at the top of their game find themselves wanting more from life. Whether it's more meaning, unshakable confidence, a bigger impact, more money, deeper love, a hotter sex life, or a powerful legacy. Find out how good your life can be on this episode of Man Alive. Also, as I've supported men in their love and work lives for 15 years now, many men ask for the right words to say to be more successful, attractive, and desirable. But I found it's not so simple as giving scripts or lines because every man is different. So giving words or scripts would be like giving a tall, thin man a shorter, wider man's pants, or vice versa. The words have to make sense for you and your personality, and there's so much happening beneath the surface that people are responding to. If you're interested in how to become a better lover and leader in your own unique way, go to shanajamescoaching.com/quiz, or you can text ALIVE to 44144. It only takes a couple minutes and you'll start to get an idea of how you can be both more respected and desired. After you fill it out, we can schedule a time to review your quiz and talk about your specific challenges and desires. So again, go to either shanajamescoaching.com/quiz or text ALIVE to 44144. That's ALIVE to 44144. Enjoy this episode of Man Alive. Hello and welcome to Man Alive. I'm here today with Greg Clunas, and we're going to talk about setting goals that actually work or actually stick. And I wanted to bring in the context of being in a pandemic, a lot of chaos for men who are parents. There's homeschooling. There's, being around family more than ever, in closer quarters than ever. Now in California, it's fire season. It feels kind of apocalyptic. And so in some ways I could see people saying like, wow, how are we going to set goals at all and actually make them happen? So thank you for being here today to share your framework and help people, set goals and actually be effective with them.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here, and hopefully people walk away with some value.
Awesome. So let me give you a quick bio and then we'll dive in. 5 years ago, Greg started a podcast in his one-bedroom New York City apartment called Tiny Leaps, Big Changes with a Simple Mission to redefine personal development. Since then, it's grown to nearly 15 million downloads across 100 plus countries with regular top 20 rankings in the mental health and health categories. And last year, he published his first book by the same name, which has been really well received and available in bookstores everywhere. Greg is passionate about helping people get out of their own way so they can create real change and build the life they've always wanted. So thank you for doing this. It sounds like a fun journey to start from your little one bedroom and grow to 15 million podcast listeners.
Like most things in life, and I'm sure your listeners have experienced this as well. It was not intentional. It sort of stumbled into my life, and I've just been riding the wave ever since. So it's been a cool journey for sure.
Interesting. So this wasn't something that you actually set a specific goal around.
Nope.
When you started.
Which is ironic, I know.
Which is ironic, right?
No, actually, when I started the Tiny Leaps, Big Changes podcast, that was one of many projects. And I still have the journal entries from that time of all the different things I was excited about, all the things that I was working on. I had just quit my full-time job, my first full-time job. And I went off on my own. I had some web design clients at the time. So I thought, you know what, I can build something there, grow it into an agency. And I'd always wanted to work for myself. So that was the ultimate goal. Like, let's at least get out of that world and try to figure it out. I started the podcast kind of last minute. So I quit December 14th, December 22nd of 2015, I had the idea for Tiny Leaps, launched it January 1st, sort of put it on the back burner to focus on this huge web agency I was going to build. And very quickly realized that I had something. So doubled down from that point on.
Cool. Very cool. All right. Well, can you help us, for those of us who set goals and may not accomplish them, how do you actually start to, do your goal setting in a way that sticks?
Yeah. So there's a couple things that we have to look at here. With goal setting, there's some not so helpful ways of looking at it,
Mm-hmm.
to put it simply. So we've all heard of, let's say, like the SMART goal framework, and that's one that I always go to a lot because I think it's the most widely known. But the underlying principle behind it, I think, is widespread in goal setting and personal development as a whole, and that is we're going to set specific goals that maybe we put a timeline on, maybe we
Yeah.
get some additional accountability for it, but all of these external things are meant to motivate us and get us to actually take action. And at the end of the day, that's the outcome that people are looking for, is how can I get myself to actually do the things? Because
Okay.
that's where the result comes in. If
Right. I
we
mean, this
set a
seems totally
goal,
normal, right? Like, there's a thing I want to do.
exactly.
How do I get
Right.
myself to do the thing?
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So the problem with this approach to goal setting is that it doesn't consider the individual. It
Mm.
doesn't consider the lives that they are currently living, the
Yep.
things that are possible for them in that moment.
Yep.
And I never try to be like, oh, um, uh, you know, you're dreaming too big or anything like that.
Yeah.
But there is a list of things based on where you are in your life in this particular moment that are more possible than others.
Hmm.
And even the things that are further along,
Yeah.
they're still technically possible, but you're going to have to do 3 or 4 things before that becomes within reach.
Can you
So
give an
the way,
example of that?
so let's say, I'll give an example from my own life.
Okay.
So I recently started, maybe about 6 months ago, a weight loss journey.
Mm-hmm.
So I've always been sort of 170, 180 my entire life. And somewhere in the last year, I went up to above 200, which
Mm-hmm.
was a shock to me.
Hmm.
So I started taking eating seriously. I started taking exercise seriously. And there's a lot of I needed to learn, both about
Yep.
how nutrition works, but also
Yep.
specifically my body.
Yep.
And so I started this journey. When I started, so March-ish of this year, I did a weigh-in. I was 206 and I think 28% body fat.
Wow. You do not
Recently,
look like
I'm
that
down.
now. I know people can't see you, but
I didn't look like it then. That's why it was such a shock to me.
interesting.
And recently I did a weigh in. I'm in my 180s, and I think I'm down to like 22%.
Mm-hmm.
Now that's not insane life changing numbers yet, but there was no possible way that in a 6-month period of time I
Yeah.
was going to go from 206 to, let's say, 170 and
Right.
13%.
No, that would
Like
not be
that's
healthy. That would not
that
be
wouldn't be
reasonable.
healthy, and I don't even think it's physically possible.
Yeah.
However, that doesn't mean that 170 and 13% is impossible for me.
Right.
It just means there's a lot of steps along the way before that becomes within reach.
Do you feel
And
like some people set goals that are too big, too fast, and then they get,
they get
deflated?
overwhelmed and then they don't take action.
Mm-hmm.
They set goals that are possible for them, but 6 or 7 lily pads away. I always use
Uh-huh.
this analogy of the frog going across the pond.
Yeah.
So you've got the lily pad right in front of you. You maybe got 1-2 steps away that you could leap for and really reach.
Yep.
But the one at the other end of the pond is not within reach yet. You have to wait till you get to the ones closer first.
Mm-hmm.
So going back to how we set goals, I think that approaches like the SMART framework,
Mm-hmm.
set us up for failure more often than it supports us.
Hmm.
And what we need to be doing is looking at where our lives are, what our constraints are in this moment, which
Yeah.
are real. They're not necessarily negative, but
Yeah.
if you have kids, and especially if they're young kids, those are constraints. It makes
Right.
it
They are constraining.
So you have to recognize what those things are,
Yeah.
keep them in mind, and then from there, within that context, you set your goals,
Okay.
rather than setting goals and then trying to figure out where in your life you're going to jam them.
Uh-huh.
And if you make that switch in your goal setting, regardless of framework that you use, regardless of approach, purely this approach to I want to build goals into my life rather than build my life into my goals. If you
Uh-huh.
can make that shift, then you're far more likely to take action, because now
Succeed.
you're setting goals that actually fit within your life, that are within reach for you.
Yeah.
And you're far less likely to get overwhelmed and end up quitting.
Yeah. Okay. A couple of things I want to ask.
Yes.
What are some of the other constraints that you see? And then how do you actually have people take those into account, right? Like you can write them down, you can know what they are, but how do you actually work with them?
Yeah. So another constraint, for example, is the one that I gave with my own weight loss journey. It's not physically possible for me to drop 30 pounds and 20% body fat in this period of time. Like
Yeah.
that is a constraint. Where I'm starting is a constraint for this potential.
Right. So like physicality, gravity, the way the world works,
Right,
how
the
our bodies work.
logical laws of the universe.
Yes. Yes.
So it's things like that. Where are you actually starting in relation to this big goal you set? If you've never been able to save $1,000, which is I know something that a lot of Americans struggle with, then making $1 million a year,
Is
that's not going to
not a
happen right
tiny
now.
leap, let's say.
Like it's possible, but
Yeah.
it's not going to happen right now.
Yep.
So where you start there, that is a constraint.
Yep.
Having kids, like I mentioned, is a constraint. Having a job that you need to, like if you are a trader on Wall Street, you're working a lot. That
Yeah.
is a constraint that might affect your dating life. That is a
Yeah.
constraint that might affect your nutrition. If you have to work multiple jobs, that is a constraint that affects
Mm-hmm.
a number of
Mm-hmm.
other things. So it's really just about what is the life you live right now? What do you need to do in order to maintain life?
Yeah.
From that is your list of constraints. How
Yeah.
does that then affect these goals that you want?
Okay. So another question maybe we can put on the side is like, how do you know if it's an actual constraint or you're making an excuse? But I think more what
Mm.
I want to hear in this moment is, what do you do with those constraints, right? Is it just that now we intellectually know and so we build things differently, or is there some other way that we take those constraints into account?
It's about building the system differently. I'm a big fan of a systems process driven approach to personal development. I don't personally like I'm not a big like manifester. I'm not a big like the secret law of attraction type of person.
Yeah.
I am a the
You seem a little
actions.
more rooted, down to earth,
Right. And
logical.
to be fair, my girlfriend's introducing me to a lot of more of that stuff. I do meditate with crystals now because I think they're
Great.
cool.
Yeah.
But I'm a very like if A then B kind of approach to personal development.
Yeah.
And I think if you build the system to support your life, you're far more likely to execute within that system
Uh-huh.
rather than trying to jam your life into a system and then getting overwhelmed and freaked out and quitting.
Yeah.
And then the other part of it, and so it comes down to these are my constraints. I'm going to build a system that works within that. But then
Mm-hmm.
also a big thing for me is self empathy in your
Mm.
goal setting and in your
Wow.
day-to-day action taking. So it cannot like we're not serving ourselves or anyone else
Yeah.
if we beat ourselves up for not doing something,
Mm.
if
Yeah.
we get upset at ourselves for failing, if we don't do it as well as we wanted to, and all of a sudden that's a bad thing.
Yeah.
Any progress, in my opinion, is a good thing. And that's why I say all big changes come from the tiny leaps you take every day.
Mm.
That progress might be as small as, like, it might be inconceivable. It might be something you can't even see. You don't recognize it in your life
That you just did
whatsoever.
it, like whatever the
It's
thing
just
was,
a
you
thing you
actually
did
took that
one day,
action. Yeah.
but that's still making progress for you. That's still helping as far as building the habit for that action.
Yeah.
That's helping as far as finding the space for it, learning what you need to learn. Like
Yes.
all of that matters, even if it's not showing up in your day-to-day life.
Yeah.
And we need to allow those days when we don't do as much, or quite frankly, we don't do anything. We need
Yeah.
all of that to be okay,
Sounds like a
because at
very
the end of the
humane
day,
approach.
so that's exactly where I was going to go with
Yeah.
it. I'm a big fan of making personal development as human centric as possible,
Yeah.
as opposed to how, like, there's two groups as far as I see it. You've got the far manifest vision board approach to it. Like, I'm
Mhm.
just going to wish for this thing and cross my fingers and that's it.
Hope.
Then you've got the far hustle culture. I'm going to go head first, work 27 hours a day and make this thing happen for myself.
Yeah.
I think that most people need to operate somewhere in that middle where
Uh-huh.
you are a human being. You are not a machine. You can't work 27 hours and think that you're still as productive as you were.
Yeah.
But you also need to give yourself room and let yourself heal and deal with your emotions and all of that stuff.
Yes. Okay, great. So can you give us an example? Because right now it still feels kind of vague around like,
Mhm.
how do you create your goals? How do you create that structure? How do you take into account the considerations?
So I created a different framework for goal setting that I call LEAP. So LEAP, The L stands for long term. So when you're sitting down, you're figuring out your goals, you should be, and this is for a type of goal that, in my opinion, requires long term lifestyle changes. I still think SMART goals can be helpful for other things that have to be specific. If you need
Okay.
to hit a sales target at work or something, but so going back to Leap, sitting down and looking at what is that long-term lifestyle change that I want, and structuring or using that language in your goal setting. So instead
Mhm.
of I want to lose 20 pounds, it's I want to improve my relationship to food. I want to eat more greens. I want to
Mm.
add more fiber to my diet, whatever it
Live
is.
longer, feel healthier,
Um,
like all those, it's like
exactly.
your
Things that
vision.
are long term
Yeah.
that require a change in behavior over a long period of time.
Yeah.
The second, that E stands for empathy. And that's where that self empathy comes in, and that means allowing it to be okay when you drop off, letting
Mm.
it be fine when you fail, recognizing that failure, in my opinion, doesn't actually truly exist
Exist.
unless you are deciding that, like, if I apply for a job and I don't get that job, am I never going to apply for another job ever again?
Right.
Because that's the only way that I've failed. Like,
Right.
if
The only
I
way to fail
got,
is actually to give up and stop and
it's
not
to give
actually
up
move
or
forward.
to decide that, like, it's not even failure if you decide this isn't the right goal anymore.
Right.
If you think that's success, you avoided a bad outcome.
Mm-hmm.
So truly, failure is not a thing that exists. And I think if we can allow ourselves to operate with that understanding, with that empathy,
Yeah.
then it's just a lot less pressure in our day to day action taken. The A is that action. So, what are the specific behavioral outcomes or the specific behaviors that drive the outcomes we're looking for?
Uh-huh.
And obviously, this depends on your goal. If it's in your fitness, then it's eating better or working out or whatever it is. If
So
it's
for
in
your
finance,
weight
saving.
loss, what were some of
For
the actions that
so
you
for weight loss, for me, it was first I needed to better understand what the food I was eating was doing to me.
Mhm.
And so, and I want to preface this by saying I don't recommend people do it. It's borderline unhealthy. I started weighing myself every single day, multiple times a day,
Uh-huh.
because I wanted to see what every single thing that I put in my body, how it affected the number on
Hmm.
the scale, the body fat percentage, the water weight, so on and so forth. And I
Interesting.
invested in like a scale that gave all that information. Um, and that worked for me because I am very data driven,
Yes.
but that can become unhealthy very quickly. And I noticed it in myself. So I gave myself a period of breaks built into it.
Okay.
Um, so depending on your goal, it's going to be whatever you need it to be. But ultimately, there are a set of key behaviors that drive outcomes. You need to identify those things. And
And do you
then,
have a certain number? Is it like, you should have 3 action items a
no,
day or no, nothing like that?
no, I don't do anything like that. And I think that really comes back to the empathy part of it. There are going to be some days where the thing you can do if you want, I don't know, I always go back to the flossing example. If you want healthier teeth and you want to start flossing, the thing you can do that day is floss one tooth before you pass out because you're exhausted from working 7 jobs that day.
Yeah.
Um, that's got to be okay. And like setting this arbitrary, oh, it has to be 3, it has to be 5, it just doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah. I love the
Um,
compassion, the empathy there that, because I think part of what takes us down so often is the inner critic. Oh shit,
yeah.
I didn't do this. And so now I'm just going to give up. And that voice that's so hard on us.
Well, the minute that you start beating yourself up for lack of action or action that in your mind wasn't good enough,
Mm-hmm.
all of a sudden that goal becomes heavier. It's
Yeah.
it's something that's significantly harder for you to do because you're
Right.
associating it with beating yourself up and being upset about it.
Right. It's no
As
longer
opposed to,
exciting
it's not
or
something exciting, it's not something you want to try
inspiring.
anymore. And I think trial and error is, quite frankly, the key to success long term,
Hmm.
is just being willing to try a lot of things and see what happens and let all outcomes be okay.
Cool.
And then the P in Leap is process focused. So what I mean by that, and this was, I recently got into running.
Mm-hmm.
This was a major part of what allowed me to finally pick up that behavior, which I've I hated running. I was the kid in
Oh,
high
I know,
school
I get that.
that,
I hate running
like,
with a vengeance.
presidential fitness day, I tried to skip. I pretended to be sick. Like, I hated running.
Uh-huh.
Finally got into it because I allowed when I say process focused, it means the success metric
Yeah.
is, did I do it or not?
Uh-huh.
So it doesn't matter how far I went, it doesn't
Yep.
matter how fast I went. If I just went outside and ran down the block one day,
You
that
win.
was still successful. That was
Uh-huh.
a win for me. And by switching that criteria from, it doesn't count if I don't do the full 2 miles, or it doesn't count if I don't do it at the speed that I set, to it counts as long as I went outside and did it,
Yeah.
that made it significantly less of a burden for
Hmm.
me to actually go and do the run, which then allowed me to do it for a long period of time. And now it's something that I actually enjoy and crave.
Interesting. So
Um,
process focus being you can take these small steps to get to the eventual goal, or is there some other
process
meaning there?
focus, yeah, so process focused meaning the process of it is
Mhm.
what success is. Are you in the process or not, if as opposed to outcome focused.
So
So as
with your
opposed
weight
to,
loss, what would
mhm,
the process be there?
the process would be, am I, for me personally,
Mhm.
am I making salads for lunch, am I going for my runs, am I eating a healthier breakfast as opposed to going to McDonald's because I'm out of time, like,
Uh-huh.
am I doing those things?
Yep.
If so, then it's a win. If
Okay.
not, then I need to figure out why I'm not, and look at that.
Right. Okay. And then what do you do with that? With the do you have a process then for looking at when something isn't going the way you want it to go? How do you explore that?
I honestly, so I still journal a lot, and I spend a lot of time, again, being very data driven. I spend a lot of time looking at what are sort of the factors going on around the activity.
Hmm.
So for example, I know that nights that I'm up late working, I'm far less likely to have a healthy breakfast in the morning.
Yep.
I know that days where Rachel, my girlfriend, and I get into a fight, I'm far less likely to be productive at work. So I try to look at those sorts of factors, and it's not so much, when it's stuff like that, it's not so much about elimination, because if Rachel and I need to go through a fight and deal with
Right.
something, my
Then
relationship matters to me
yeah.
more than my work. So fuck
Yep.
productivity, excuse my
Yep.
language. But it's recognizing what sort of the cause and effects could be,
Uh-huh.
so that long term I'm able to understand what to expect.
So
So
you're not
I
doing a lot
know
of like psychological or emotional kind of digging in to understand. You're really using data.
I'm using data as much as possible. And I do spend time, like, I meditate, I go to therapy, I
Okay.
do
So you're
all of
doing
that
those
stuff as
those as
well.
well. Yeah.
I just don't tie it directly to, am I taking a behavior or not? That to me comes down to far more about situational
Yeah.
things than it does my mental state in that day.
Though
And
I think
sometimes, just real quick addition, sometimes my mental state is the situation,
right.
right? Sometimes it's dark and gloomy for a week, and I feel depressed because summer's ending and I didn't get to do anything because coronavirus is a thing.
Yeah.
Like, sometimes that's it.
Yeah.
And on those days, I kind of have to decide what's my bare minimum.
Yeah.
So if I'm looking at a productivity thing, I know I have to publish an episode. As long as I do that, I can say screw it the rest of the day and everything's fine.
Yeah.
But that's my absolute bare minimum that has to get done. And then I try, that's where we look at, almost like, I hate using the word like life hack, but almost like, what do I need to do to give myself the energy to accomplish this one single thing? And for
Mm,
me, that means sitting down, eating a healthy lunch, meditating a little bit, and
yeah.
then using the energy from that lunch and from sort of calming my mind
Your mind.
to focus exclusively on this one task, get that done, and then let myself just stop.
That's great. So, I mean, to me, as I hear it, you're using the data, but you're also doing the practices and the practices that keep our minds healthy and, our emotional soul, self, all of that healthy. So it feels harder to track or harder to tie into the goals necessarily, but it does feel like an important piece to me that you're actually doing.
Yeah, I would say it's important. I mean, mental health, and there's a long, about a year ago, I made the decision that the podcast was going to switch categories and focus on that mental health piece. And every episode is going to drive far more into the mental health piece. I mean, it's everything at the
Yeah.
end of the day. I guess I can track the data and stuff, but that also requires me to take the behavior of weighing myself, getting the data, whatever it is,
Hmm.
And if I'm not in the place mentally to do that, then I can't get any data to work with. So
Right.
at the end of the day, dealing with your inner world is massively important.
Yeah.
The reason I don't incorporate it into the process is because it's so unique for everyone.
Uh-huh.
Like, journaling works well for me, therapy works well for me, and I always, 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 always tell people to try therapy at the very least.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but for some reason, doing tarot cards works. For some people, meditation works. For
Yeah.
some people, having long conversations with their spouse works. And I just don't want to start pretending to be a mental health expert.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense. Okay. So we've got the framework, the LEAP
Yes.
framework. What else do you want people to know? What else feels important?
At the end of the day, whether or not you take a certain behavior over a period of time is, in my opinion, what drives to an extent the outcomes that you get. Now, of course, there's things you don't control, external circumstances, the world around you that can affect that. But the things you can control are: did you take the behavior or not? Did you do the thing or not? Uh, Everything, all the stuff in self-help and personal development, whether it's the internal world stuff, whether it's the productivity tools, the life hacks, all of that stuff's job is to help you do that behavior.
Mm-hmm.
But ultimately, the only thing that truly determines the outcome is that behavior. Did you do it or not? Um, and that's how I view it. That's how I was raised and live my life. And I think that if people, I think people start to get stuck on the higher level stuff, that like the tools and am I meditating or not? Am I writing my journal? Am I building my to-do list? All of that stuff that is helpful and
Yeah.
useful,
Yeah.
but they get so caught up in doing those things that they forget that it was meant to support the actual
Mm,
behavior,
yeah.
and they just forget to do that thing.
Yeah.
So if there's anything that I want people to sort of walk away with my show, and I always say, I don't, if somebody listens to an episode on my show on meditation or anything, I don't actually care if they walk away from that episode feeling like they learned something new about that particular
Mm,
topic. What I want them to walk away with is an understanding that all big changes come from the tiny leaps you take every day. Like,
uh-huh.
that's the part that's important to me. So whether you try meditation and it works for you or not, whether you try therapy and it works for you or not, like all of those things, figure out what works for your life. At the end of the day, you have to do the thing. And you can be kind to yourself and compassionate and let it be okay if you don't, let it be okay if you fail. All of that is still important because it helps you continue doing the thing for a long period of time.
Right.
And that's the part that I really want to drive home to people.
I like that because as you're taking actions, you're actually more in a growth mindset or a growth, way of living rather than getting stagnant and giving up and just,
Hmm.
letting it go because you didn't quite make it or, for some reason it didn't work out, whatever it may be, right? To give up. Uh, like I'd rather see someone, like you said, take these small steps, tiny leaps, rather than just give up and not do it at all.
Yeah, and what I've seen happen with listeners, and there's different groups of people. You'll have the people that start taking tiny leaps, and that's the thing that helps them sort of get past the initial hurdle.
Yeah.
But because they are inherently ambitious, because they are inherently driven, those tiny leaps end up growing into massive, massive steps that
Mm.
change their lives dramatically. Um, Versus the other group of people who start taking tiny leaps that helps them get over the hurdle, and they remain taking tiny leaps for forever. And
Uh-huh.
ultimately, I think both are incredible
Yeah.
because at the end of the day, both groups of people are creating changes based on the life they want, based on the type of person they are. And that's really what's important.
Yeah.
Um, but for both groups, because I get a lot of people saying, oh, but I'm really ambitious. I want this huge goal. I want this thing.
Hmm.
You've got to start where you're at.
Mm-hmm.
If you are sitting there dreaming and believing like, oh, I'm capable of all these things, but you're not doing anything at all,
Uh-huh.
then do the small thing, even if it feels stupid to start there.
Yeah.
And I think that that'll help you because you are ambitious. You'll eventually start doing those bigger things because now it's a priority, it's a part of your identity, and it's a habit.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for this. Where can people find you if they want more of you?
So the best thing, if you are listening to this show, do a quick search for Tiny Leaps, Big Changes, and give that podcast a listen. There are close to 600 episodes, so there's
Wow.
plenty to choose from.
Nice.
Find whatever jumps out at you, and then once you've given it a listen, follow the podcast over on Instagram at Tiny Leaps and send me a message. I'd love to get your feedback on the episode. If you have ideas for future episodes that you want to have covered, let me know those too. Ultimately, I just want to get into a conversation. So send me a message there.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
I'm so glad you joined us for today's episode of Man Alive. I hope you enjoyed our conversation and it gave you something to consider and explore in your life. If you like what you heard, I'd be so grateful for you to subscribe and write a quick review that helps men like you find us. And again, head over to shanajamescoaching.com/quiz or text the word ALIVE, ALIVE, to 44144 to get a sense of how you can become a better lover and leader. You'll start to see how you can be both more respected and desired in your unique and genuine way. If you don't feel as confident or as excited about life or love as you'd like to be, this quiz is a really great starting point and will guide you toward a more passionate love life and a more inspiring and successful career. So again, text ALIVE, ALIVE, to 44144 or head over to shanajamescoaching.com/quiz. Join us each week for a new episode of Man Alive.